Hello, and welcome to Loaves to Legends, your new favourite history podcast brought to you by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. I'm your host, Gia, and I'm here with the rest of our lovely Loaves to Legends team to entertain, educate, and indulge you in all things big and small related to our gorgeous town of Sandwich. Shortly, I'll be joined by a second host of today, Bertie, to give you today's episode. But before we get into that, I want to encourage all of you wonderful people to not just listen, but to get involved too. One of the things that we want to emphasize on Loaves to Legends is that this podcast is yours as much as it is ours. We have a wonderful online community and you can chat to other history-loving fans on our Discord. Or you can email us any facts or feedbacks at loavetolegends@gmail.com. The link to both the Discord and email are in the episode description. Today I'll be joined by a fellow museum volunteer, Bertie. Hi Bertie, how are you?
I'm doing alright, thanks. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Well, welcome back, Bertie. Listeners, you'll probably be aware that we have had Bertie join us a couple of times before, so it's great to have you again as co-host here.
No, it's really nice to be back. I'm looking forward to this one.
Right, let's get straight into it. Throughout this season of Loaves to Legends, we've explored the answers to questions that we get asked a lot, and we've explored objects from our collection that aren't on display. But today we're going to be discussing an object that only very recently became part of our collection. Bertie, this is a story of a Bible that travelled 3,000 miles and back. It's very, very recent, so this is really exciting stuff to share on the podcast and as a museum, so you guys, listeners, can get as enthusiastic as we are about our new item we've got. So, in the summer of this year, an email appeared in Manager Millie's inbox. It was from someone called Leslie, who had an object she wished to donate to the museum. You probably already guessed it, the object was the Bible. We're going to explore how it came to travel thousands of miles, and perhaps, more importantly, we're going to learn about the people connected to it. I must firstly point out that this episode was researched and written by Millie, so although I am delivering the story to you, I'm also learning about it alongside you, listeners, as well as Bertie. Also, those of you who listened right up to the last second, we appreciate you very much. You will notice that Leslie is credited on the episode with research and writing. That's because she has done a huge amount of research into her family in connection with the donation of this Bible. So thank you very much, Leslie. Now you may be thinking, why is the Bible interesting? Even one that has travelled 3,000 miles. We do have a few Bibles in our collection, and Bertie, you may have even come across some of them during your volunteering here. But this Bible contains extra details that make it unique. For example, Dutch maps bound into it dating from 1648, death dates from people associated with it, and even some signatures. But we're going to focus on two other pieces of information. The Bible is in 3 sections, and one of these sections contains a note recording its purchase, stating that it was bought by Robert Roots in 1684. The other detail I want to highlight is a list of people, 11 to be exact, who do not have the surname Roots. So, who was Robert Roots? And why does his Bible have these 11 names listed in it? And why did the Bible travel thousands of miles? These are all interesting questions, and I'm excited to fill you in on all the details. But first, let's talk about books in general. Bertie, do you read?
I do read quite often for enjoyment as well as for outside of school, as well as have to.
Do you read, so do you tend to go for more fictional, or do you like a non-fictional book?
I try and have a mixture of both, but I do usually prefer non-fiction.
Same. I think I always, if I can read a fiction book maybe in like 2 days. Non-fiction book takes me absolutely ages, but for some reason I much prefer the non-fiction, even if it takes me a lot longer. Is there a non-fiction book you can think of? Putting you on the spot right here, Bertie. A non-fiction book that you can think of that you liked reading?
Nothing really points out to me exactly in the moment because I've been doing lots of background reading for uni applications and things like that.
Of course, you've been doing the necessary reading. Sometimes you drag that.
I've not exactly time for enjoying myself reading recently, but I do find it so interesting. It sort of turns into that, but no.
When you do get a chance to read again for your own pleasure, whenever that is.
I enjoy the subjects anyway, so I really don't mind.
Well, the books have probably been around as long as the invention of writing. You may have heard of clay tablets or carvings or materials other than paper. These are very early versions of books. The earliest known author that we know the name of was, and I'm definitely going to pronounce this name wrong, individual who wrote poetry around 2334 to 2279 BCE. We aren't going to explore the whole history of books, but the point is, different versions of the book have been around for a long time. In the 15th century, books became recognized as objects for trade. They were originally made using vellum, as an animal skin, but around this time a new material arriving from China started becoming more popular: paper. Johannes Gutenberg started the printing revolution in 1440 in Germany when he invented a movable type printing press. This reduced the price of printing books across Europe as the new technology spread to neighbouring countries. At this time, the person writing the book was often also the printer and the publisher. In England, a man called William Caxton travelled to Belgium in 1474 after learning to print in Germany. He established a business with his own printing press, choosing to publish in English rather than Latin, before eventually returning to England with his skills. Gradually, various organisations decided it would be beneficial to them to have more control over what was being printed. The Church in particular was not impressed by the writing produced by reformers, and made an order that must give permission before a book associated with the church is printed or sold, and some Dutch people even suffered at the stake for creating Protestant books. In England, the establishment of the Stationers' Company was an attempt at controlling content in books by restricting who was allowed to print and sell them. This is relevant because one of the first books to be printed by the Dutch was a Bible. Why am I talking about the Dutch specifically? Because we need to discuss the inclusion of Dutch maps in this particular Bible. One of the maps was created by Jacob Savory III, who was also a Dutch engraver and publisher born in 1617. There's a caption on the map referring to a pilgrimage which took place, and it is signed by Jacob Savory in the year 1648. Another one of the maps is created by Nicholas Versier, who was also a Dutch engraver and cartographer. He created a double hemisphere map in Amsterdam in 1658, a copy of which is included in our Bible. The maps in the Bible also include engraved depictions of different religious scenes, such as Adam and Eve being sent away, and Fisher's map has images of Zeus and Neptune. But why do we think they were in Robert Roots' Bible?
It makes sense with the religious depictions, such as Adam and Eve, but then also the images of Zeus sort of contradict that. So I think it could just be personal interest from someone who owned it, and also considering how expensive books were at the time, it would have been a good place to keep everything together.
The truth is, I'm not completely sure either, but let me explain my theory. In 1561, Flemish people fled due to religious persecution during the Reformation. A decade later, the Dutch Reformed Church met for the first time. This was earlier than the dates of the Bible's creation, but Robert Roots would have been likely to have been aware of these people. We will discover soon that Robert was a Presbyterian, which originates from Calvinism, or Reformed Christianity. The Dutch were especially known for their engraving skills and the production of maps. In 1618, the Synod of Dort, which was an assembly of members of the Dutch Reformed Church, ordered a translation of the original Hebrew Bible into Dutch. This was called the Staten, meaning States Translation. An important edition of this Bible was the Dutch Keur Bible, which included illustrations of various biblical events, as well as maps. In 1646, an English translation was commissioned. I cannot say for certain if the English version contained maps from the original Dutch version, but here are my thoughts on other potential reasons for their inclusion. The Bible is in 3 parts, and we assume someone bound them together at some point, possibly Robert, so perhaps he bound copies of the maps used in Dutch Bibles into his version. The other suggestion that I've already mentioned, the Bible was translated into English and the Dutch maps were included in this version. And then another potential option is that Robert Roots was Dutch and settled in Dover, but for some reason had an English Bible. It was quite unlikely, but we have struggled to find an English birth record that is definitely his. And again, record keeping at the time was not the best, as we'll discuss later. Bertie, do you have any other thoughts to this?
All these theories do make a lot of sense, especially considering that the Dutch version of the Bible did already have those maps. So it would make sense if, let's say, he wanted a more complete version, let's say, that he would have those maps bound in. It does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I would think you're doing an English translation, you would everything
Yeah, it makes sense that you would want everything, especially as the Dutch translation was a direct translation from the Hebrew. So in that case, you would want everything to ensure it's the most accurate version you can get.
Okay, I've mentioned Robert Roots a few times, and it's finally time to learn a bit more about him. For the first part of the story, we're actually in Dover. We don't exactly know when Robert Roots was born, as I said, but we believe when he was older he had a wife called Elizabeth. Research seems to suggest that Robert and Elizabeth married in 1680 at St Margaret's at Cliff, which is an area between Dover and Deal. We can't say for sure that this is the Robert and Elizabeth Roots from our story, but it seems very likely. To explain why we can't say for sure, we need to explore what was happening when they were starting their life together in Dover. Let's rewind to 1509 when a certain well-known king took the throne. Bertie, can you remember who that king was?
If my research for my A-levels is going well, I presume it's Henry VIII.
I feel like I have to say your research and your A-level seems to be doing quite good, Bertie.
It's good to know.
You are correct, it was Henry VIII. Many people can conjure up an image of him dressed in his decorative Tudor clothing. More likely, they will recall the fate of his many wives. Forced beheaded died, forced beheaded survived. As Horrible Histories has taught us very well. And also the musical Six. But moving on. But we're not talking about that right now. We will briefly touch on what Henry got up to before our story begins, though. Bertie, can you tell us about the big change that Henry VIII made during his reign?
Likely the English Reformation.
Okay, a little behind the scenes, Bertie and I were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, and Bertie, due to his studies, does know quite a bit. What's a fun fact about Henry VIII and his changing of the country's or the church's religion?
My favourite thing about it was it's well known that the change was from Catholicism to Protestantism because he didn't like that the Pope was interfering with his divorces. And my personal favourite thing about that was that in the way that Henry VIII personally practiced his religion, because he was raised a Catholic, the way that even after the national religion was formally changed, he didn't actually change much of the ways that he actually practiced. So even though he was practically a practicing Catholic, he still called himself Protestant, which I always find quite funny.
It's interesting, realize that it was actually reality or fact of it, because being taught, at least in the lower education years, of being oh yeah, the church is now Protestant, that means Henry's Protestant. But no, you're right, he wasn't. He was still a practicing Catholic, basically.
It also makes a lot of sense with the turmoil that followed after his death and then the following Tudor monarchs, the fact that it basically flip-flopped between Catholicism and Protestantism again. Because it makes a lot of sense based on how Henry actually practiced religion, because it would make sense that his children wouldn't actually have seen him practicing Protestantism, so it makes sense that they themselves wouldn't have been Protestant, but some of them were, some of them wasn't. It's all a bit strange.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, back to this though. In 1538, under the courts of Henry VIII, Thomas Cromwell made an order that weddings, baptisms, and burials should be recorded. Over the years, there were events that affected this, and it got worse around 1642, when the English Civil War broke out. All of this is to say that records may be patchy in places, so that is why the beginning of the story is not completely confirmed. Robert and Elizabeth were married, and, as mentioned, 4 years later in 1684 is when the Bible comes into the story. It is inscribed with the following: Robert Roots. His book cost 28 shillings in the year 1684, although most of the words in the sentence are spelled differently to how we would spell them today. How much do you think 20 shillings is in today's money, Bertie?
I presume it will be quite a lot in today's money. Also, I'm not very good with pre-decimalisation anyway, but I am presuming that it would be quite a lot of money, especially considering how expensive books were at the time.
Well, I don't have a completely accurate figure, but it was over £100 in today's money. We roughly make it about £110, whereas Leslie made it more than £200. Were you expecting about that much money, or was that?
I was expecting about that amount, but it is also amazing to think how he could put that money together. Because, well, if you think of it now, £100, obviously it's a fair amount, but it's not a huge number you'd expect. But considering how little people made back then, especially the average person, that's an absurd amount of money to spend.
It is. I don't know about monetary value and how it changes throughout time. So in my head, shillings was far less. So reading that was a bit more shocking for me, I have to admit. But I said previously that the Bible is 3 separate books bound together. It includes a copy of the Church of England Book of Common Prayer, published in 1679, a copy of the King James Bible, published in 1683, and a book of the Falgate Palms, which is undated, but Robert Root's purchase is noted in this section. Here is where I test your knowledge again, Bertie. Charles II made some changes to religion in this country. Can you tell us what he did?
Can I just think for a sec? So...
so we're really pushing it here.
Oh, yeah. Because after reinstation of the monarchy, it's also reinstation of the Church of England, because he was head of the Church of England.
Exactly. You're right. The monarch is the head of church, the head of state. So when King Charles II came and reinstated the monarch, he reinstated the Church of England. Very well done. However, Robert Root's burial record states that he was Presbyterian. Presbyterianism was practiced by those who followed Reformed traditions within Protestantism. The different sections of this Bible also suggest the family were nonconformists. So nonconformists, and since at least I get an idea is not conforming to the majority, obviously, as the word says, but Bertie, nonconformists, especially at this time of how religious teachings were and how strong religious beliefs were held. When you had Presbyterianism and the more stricter Protestantism with Cromwell, and Charles II comes back to reinstate the Church of England, what do you think it meant when I say that his family, Robert Root's family, were nonconformists?
I think it would have been very difficult for them to live like that, especially considering how as religion was instated by the king, and it was a national religion, and obviously divine right of kings, the king spoke directly to God. Showing any form of resistance to that probably would have been quite controversial in the local area. I wouldn't go as far to say dangerous, because there aren't that many records of, especially at that time, that religious persecution wasn't that high.
At least it wasn't for the Presbyterianism.
Yeah, at least for Presbyterianism. Yeah, it was mostly Catholicism, but at least for Presbyterianism, I've never heard of religious persecution over Presbyterianism, but it definitely would have been quite controversial in the local area.
And for listeners as well, in case you weren't sure, Bertie mentioned divine rights of the king. That is a belief held by many of the monarchs back in the time that we are speaking of now, where the king believed that the person below God was the king, was the monarch, because the monarch directly spoke to God. Therefore, whatever the king said was a direct word of the Lord, so everyone had to follow what he said. Around the time that Robert and Elizabeth got married, life for nonconformists, as you have suggested, Bertie, was difficult. Their civil and political rights could be limited. For example, they couldn't have careers in the civil service or go to university. Robert and Elizabeth christened their children at St. James's Church in Dover, which is now only ruins. Do you think that this was to ensure their children had a better life without these restrictions?
I'd say so. Probably it would make a lot of sense if that was the case, especially considering how difficult it was with those restrictions. And as they most likely wanted the best for their children, it would make sense why they did that.
I think it says a lot about a family that, despite your own strict personal beliefs, you already have your life limited because of your religious beliefs, and so you don't want your children to have that. So to have them baptized in a church that's not your own religion, just for the sake of their future, it speaks volumes.
It does also raise the question, because with the records that are being taken at the time, if they did have their children baptized separately, would have it been recorded?
Okay, yeah.
Especially with like the separatist religious movements.
So this is a way to keep their children on record.
So to keep it on record so that they didn't have those restrictions in place, then they could also have been baptized in another way.
I like it. It's interesting. That's a good point. So a question we have to also bring up here is that the churches in England would have been Church of England. So if they wanted to baptize their children, would that mean that the only option was to christen them? So maybe it wasn't a case of, as we were suggesting, to protect the children's future or to make sure the children are on record, maybe off record, they're going and being christened elsewhere. Maybe it was simply a case of they had no other choice. To not be baptized in their religion meant to not go into the afterlife. It seems fairly likely that they did this for their children to have a better opportunities. Most of them were born before the 1689 Act of Toleration, which allowed nonconformists, such as Presbyterians like our family here, the freedom to worship. Robert and Elizabeth had several children, and our story now follows one of their daughters, Elizabeth, who married someone called James Wood. We're dealing with some pretty common names here, and records are becoming clearer, but as I said, they might not still hold all the details that we need. However, the family had roots in Dover, specifically the area where St James's Church was situated, and there is a James Wood and Elizabeth Roots who got married at this same church in 1725. James was a freeman of Dover. Freemen received privileges, such as the right to levy taxes and to trade within town. As well as this, they could have discounts on tolls. The mayor chose to for the town from those who were freemen. Leslie's research notes on James's freeman record, it states that he was a cord. Any thoughts on what a cord is, Bertie?
I presume it's some kind of manufacture, like he's obviously making something. I presume it would either be something to do with textiles or maybe rope. I feel like with cord, I feel like that'd be too on the nose. I don't know.
Ooh. Okay, keep holding to that. So the cordwainer is from a similar word associated with the old French word cordonion, which means leather of Cordoba, which is a Spanish city known for producing leather that was ideal for making shoes. So James was apparently a shoemaker. Not
I think that was quite a good guess.
far off, Bertie, at him. Yeah. We believe James and Elizabeth Wood had 4 children, born in succession over the years not long after they were married. 2 of them didn't survive very long, and the final child, Elizabeth, only lived for around 15 years. They were all buried at St James's Church. The surviving child, Thomas, is who we are going to follow next. Thomas Wood was born around 1728 and christened in St James's Church as the children before him had been. He married someone called Mary. There's little information about them. The Bible actually includes Thomas and Mary's death dates. It states, the 7th of April 1811 died Mary Wood in the 76th year of her age. Buried the 15th of April 1811, a sincere friend, a good wife and tender mother. And the 19th of September 1819 died Thomas Wood in the 91st year of his age. Buried the 25th of September 1819. Because we know Mary's age and when she died, we can estimate her year of birth as being 1735. These details match the marriage record, so we can determine that Mary's maiden name was something similar to Stubble. There's not much more known about Thomas and Mary, apart from that they definitely had one child, a boy called James, born 1759. You may be thinking, we still haven't made the sandwich yet. Well, enter Susanna Fole. Christened in 1770, Susanna was the daughter of Edmund Fole and Anne, whose maiden name was Slaughter. Anyone who knows Sandwich well or has worked through our collection of documents will recognise these surnames. James Wood married Susanna in 1792, and I believe the wedding took place in St Mary's Church here in Sandwich. Not long after marrying, they chose to move back to Dover. Their children were called Mary Ann, Eliza, Edmund, Susanna, and Sarah. Sadly, Susanna died when she was quite young. They moved back to Sandwich when they had more children, Eliza Jane, Edmund Fowle, Mariana, Elizabeth Ann, and Thomas. In total, they had, this is important, Bertie, are you ready? They had 11 children.
Wow, that's a lot of names. Do you think that could be linked back to the 11 people mentioned in the Bible?
Yes, in fact, it is. So these 11 children, these 11 names in Robert Root's Bible, it shows that it has been passed down through all of these generations.
That is a lot. Also, it's also important to remember that even though that is a very large number, even by standards back then, you have to keep in mind the infant mortality rate was so high. Quick tangent for a second. One of my favourite things is when you talk about earlier periods, such as the 1700s. You search it, you Google it or something, and you see that the average life expectancy was something like 35. And then you actually go to your local churchyard and you see all the tombstones from that period, all the people are in like their 60s and 70s. And I find that so funny because most people think that everyone was keeling over in their 30s, but it's actually because the infant mortality rate was so high. Because you have to keep in mind, if it was 1 in 2 people died in infancy, that's halving the average life expectancy. So it makes a lot more sense when you have that in mind, that we see people dying in their 70s and 80s. It makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a misconception about the past. It's just a result of range of mathematical when you work in mathematical averages, which is a cool little fact. I like that. Thank you, Bertie. But this is not the end of the story for our Robert Root's Bible, though. James was a linen draper. But before moving back to Sandwich, he sold his business in 1802 with the aim of starting a new business. He then became a timber merchant. Incredibly sadly, 3 more of their children died. They are buried at St. Clement's churchyard. Although the family plot is unmarked, Leslie notes it is close to the Slaughter and Fowl grave sites. In 1812, Susanna's father, Edmund Fowl, passed away, and Susanna inherited his estate, including property. Her daughter, Mary Anna, kept diaries, now held by the Worcester Archives and Archaeology Society. Her diaries gave an insight into their family life in Sandwich. She writes of an upper to middle class lifestyle, including visits to London and education in Europe. She also writes that her brother Thomas goes to Cambridge University. Mary Anna recorded the death of her sister, Eliza Jane, from an illness, and her mother, Susanna's, poor health as she got older. Susanna's will details the division of her father's estates among the children that were alive upon his death. She also gave £800 to the children born afterwards, which they would receive when they reached the age of 21. Mary Anna went on to marry John Moriarty, another name that residents or collection volunteers will recognise. The Bible was passed to Susanna and James's eldest surviving son, who was also called James. Now, there haven't been any unexpected major incidents so far. Bertie, are you ready for some family drama?
Oh, I'm always ready for a bit of drama. Let's get into it.
As a reminder, James, now in possession of the Bible, was born in 1803. He chose to carry on the family business as a timber merchant when his parents died, and his siblings developed an agreement that he could deal with the property they had inherited. It is believed he lived at King's Lodgings in Strand Street, which was a family home in Sandwich for some time. James is an interesting character. There are records of letters he sent to newspapers criticising the Sandwich Book Society who had rejected his brother Edmund, including rather casually stating he went to jail after he refused to carry out actions to ensure peace, which were requested by the magistrates. Despite spending time in the Sandwich Gaol, he went on to become a magistrate and even mayor. We have a list of mayors on our board in the mayor's parlour, and sure enough, James Wood is listed 3 times in 1851, 1852 and 1853. As mayor, he attended the funeral of the first Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, who was Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. James never married, choosing to live alone, apart from his housekeeper, Sarah Trigg, and her son, Charles. In fact, he was so close with them that he left them money in his will, as well as some of his possessions. His siblings were not impressed with this, and it resulted in squabbling for the solicitors between Sarah Trigg and his sisters, Sarah and Elizabeth Ann. This wasn't just his siblings being greedy, though. James apparently did owe them money. Either way, it seems the result benefited Sarah Trigg. You may be wondering, why would James do this? Do we think he is just a very nice person, or do we have another idea?
While I'm always one to believe in the wonderfulness of human kindness, I felt there were probably some ulterior motives here. I just feel like it is quite a lot to, even how amazing friends you can be with someone, to leave them stuff in your will.
Especially when they were apparently just your housekeeper.
Yeah, especially when they're just your housekeeper, which means you probably wouldn't have been that good friends with them. And also the fact if you owe people money, and you're not giving them anything.
Reading this, I immediately am thinking this man lived alone. He didn't marry. He had a woman and her son living in his house. Gave her money. I'm thinking this.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. There's a romance going on here, maybe. Well, everyone is thinking, and I'm sure you listeners, you are wanting to shout at us because it's very obvious, is that James is the father of the housekeeper's son, Charles. Apparently, Charles's records do not list his father's name, so it seems even more likely now. Well, I'm about to drop a bombshell. In 2021, descendants of either side of the family took DNA tests, and I can confirm Charles was James's secret son, albeit not even a very good secret if you ask me.
Yeah, it's nice to have absolute confirmation, but yes, it's not exactly. Yeah, so you have a live-in housekeeper. You're single. You're not married, and they suddenly have a child. It's like,
everyone knew. Everyone had to know at the time. He had a woman and her child staying in his house.
Where did this magic baby?
Where did the child come from? It's crazy. That's incredible though. In 2021, we got the results of this centuries-old drama that happened, this conspiracy from DNA testing.
It's also nice because other people out there are just interested in this.
That's true. That's true. People, the descendants of James and the descendants of Sarah are still wanting to know the gossip. James owned the star of this episode, the family Bible, but he didn't leave it to his housekeeper. Instead, it was given to his brother Edmund. Edmund chose to give it to their younger brother Thomas. You may remember Mary Anna referring to Thomas attending university. Well, in the Bible, his name appears followed by M.A., which we assume refers to a degree he gained. Thomas was a reverend, probably hence Edmund's decision to offer him the family Bible. Edmund lived a life full of adventures. He travelled to multiple places before marrying, and then he and his wife set off for Australia. They returned to Sandwich eventually, though. All of his travelling may also be why he gave the Bible to his brother. He wanted it to stay safe. Thomas Wood was ordained in 1840 and married Georgina Elizabeth Harrison. They left England immediately. Stationed near Calcutta, Thomas served as a military chaplain for the East India Company. At some point, the Bible was passed through other members of the Wood family, before ending up with Grace Wood and subsequently the son of Grace's nephew, Thomas. The Wood family lawyer gave the Bible to Thomas when he was in England carrying out military duty. He chose to give it to his mother, Winifred, who made an inscription in the Bible before giving it to her other son, Dan. I'm going to pause here to say that we are now in the mid-20th century, to give an idea of the timeline. There's also another and very important detail. The Bible travelled approximately 3,000 miles with Thomas, who took it to Canada. In 2005, Dan and his sister decided to pass it on to the caretaker for the next generation. That person is Leslie. As Leslie has written at the end of her family history, the exterior of the Bible today wouldn't look at all familiar to Robert Roots and successive owners, but the contents remain the same and speak to the faith of generations of our Wood family ancestors. She goes on to write, now the Bible is starting a new chapter in its life, back home in Sandwich. 20 years after she acquired it, Leslie decided to donate it to the museum. It travelled thousands of miles from Canada all the way to our wonderful little town, so that we at the museum can care for it and preserve it for future generations. And that is the story of the Bible that travelled 3,000 miles and back to be with us here at Sandwich Guildhall Museum. What a great story. What do you think of all of Bertie?
No, that's actually really interesting. I've actually been looking forward to this one for a while because I remember months ago when we first got emails about the Bible, there was quite a lot of buzz in the archive room about it when Millie was first talking about it. So no, it's actually really interesting to finally learn the full history of it.
I think, and it's so cool how it's the fact that the Bible's travelled so far and it's made its way back, and it's so well preserved. As Leslie stated in her research, that the outside of it looks different, but the insides are all the same, and that's incredible preservation from the whole family. It's passed out through generations. Well, that is the end of our episode now, and as we end all our episodes, it's now time to ask Question of the Week. At the end of every episode, I ask our guest host for Question of the Week, in which you guys, the listeners, can respond via our Discord server if you just join in the link below, or you can contact us through our email, gmail.com, or on social media. Right, Bertie, do you have a question in connection to today's episode?
This is very open-ended, but as you guys can discuss on social media or on Discord about it, I think this is appropriate. My question was going to be, do you have anything that's been passed down through family generations, or if you want something to be passed down through future generations, what is it, or what would it be?
Oh, I love that question. I love like antiques and stuff like that as well. So that's a really cool one. For me personally, I don't think my family has anything passed down for generations except my father's mother passed down a candelabra to me. I never met her. She passed away when my dad was young, but she passed it to him and he passed it to me. One day, actually, I should look into the history of that. Yeah. What about you?
Funny enough, we also do have a family Bible in my family. It's quite a lot newer. I think it's from the mid-1800s. But it's something nice to pass down, I think.
What a good connection to this episode as well. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Next time we should be looking into your family Bible history.
I don't think there's that much to it, to be honest, but there we are.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Bertie, again. You've been an excellent host, as always, with us in this show, and now regular, I must admit. So thank you for joining. It's been great having you here.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
We just wanted to give a quick reminder to email us any feedback, comments, or interesting facts that you know or discover in relation to the topics discussed in today's episode. Just email us at loaves2legends@gmail.com or join our Discord server and be a part of the online community. The email and Discord link will be in the episode description, as well as on our website, sandwichguildhallmuseum.co.uk. With every episode, we'll be asking a question of the week on our Discord server. This week's question is, do you have anything that's been passed down through family generations? Or do you have something that you want to pass down through future generations? If so, what is it, or what would it be? Join our Discord and have a discussion with us and other listeners to find out what our answers at the Loaves to Legends team are. But for now, goodbye from us, Gia and Bertie. We have been Loaves to Legends, the history-based podcast from Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Thank you for listening, and we'll speak again soon. Loaves to Legends is produced by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Millie and Gia are the executive producers. Today's episode was researched and written by Millie and edited by Millie. Gia and Bertie were your hosts today. Special thanks to Ian Pittaway for permission to use his translation of this music, and to Kat Batchelor for performing it. Thank you to Beth Stone for the episode artwork. And finally, a huge thanks to Leslie Wood for her donation and incredible research into her family's Bible.